Think about one of the worst things that has happened to you, or one of the worst things that you hope will never ever happen to you. It is a frightful situation. It is a scary situation. It can be a panicky situation. Some of the things may come to mind as being assaulted or being enslaved or experienced some type of injustice. But I believe the test of a person's character, a test of their faith, at least one of them, is how they handle adversity. How do you handle when you've been mistreated? How do you handle when you be abused? Can you come out of it a whole person? Can you come out of it a better person? In our lesson today, we started last week, we've been studying the life of Joseph. Joseph has experienced or will experience in our lesson a lot of adversity, things that I hope would never happen to anyone. But God uses Joseph's life to show us how to respond to adversity, and we respond to adversity by trusting Him. Stay tuned for this week's Sunday School lesson. Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. John W. Wilson III. I am bringing you the Sunday School lesson for Sunday, September the 13th, 2020. The name of the lesson, the title of the lesson is called Obedient Love. The passage that we will come out of will be Genesis chapter 41. We will first look at verses 25 through 33. We'll move over to 37 to 40. And then we'll conclude with verses 50 through 52. Obedient love. Before we get into our lesson, I would like your help in helping me reach this lesson, reach as many people as possible. So hit the like button, hit the share button. If you're on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button. I need your help, and I thank you in advance. So let's get into our lesson. Last week we started in chapter 37 of Genesis. That's when we kind of first hook up with Joseph. He's born later, but this tells us a lot about him. His background is this. He comes out of a dysfunctional family. His father is Jacob. His mother is Rebekah. Rebekah dies early on in his childhood or his teenage years when Benjamin is born. But the issue is that Jacob played favorites, or he loved Joseph more than he liked his other sons. If you remember, just a quick synopsis is that this family was very complex, very dysfunctional. It was just everywhere, all out of place. Jacob had two wives, in Leah and Rachel. He loved Rachel, did not love Leah. He had 6 sons by Leah. He had 2 sons by Rachel. He had 2 sons by 2 maidservants. So the complex picture is this. This is one man with 2 wives and 2 maidservants. In other words, he has 4 baby mamas that he has got to please. He has 12 sons and 1 daughter. There is rivalry within the family because there's favoritism in the family. Jacob loves Joseph more than he loves his other brothers. Jacob loves Rachel more than he loves his wife and his other maidservants. Creates a conflict, makes a difference, does everything for Joseph, gives him everything, buys him everything, gives him preferential treatment, does the same thing with Rachel. Rachel dies early on when she gives birth to Benjamin. So she is out of the picture when we come to chapter 37 and into chapter 41. So favoritism is there. Favoritism, as you know, is dysfunctional, it's heartaching, it builds resentment, it builds conflict within the family, and this is what happens to Joseph's family. They see him coming one day. The father sent him to spy on them or give a report on how they were doing. The youngest is reporting on the oldest. That causes a problem. And they had built up so resentment because Joseph has spied on him. He has this multicolored coat, and he has dreams. He had at least 2 dreams telling them that one day they will bow down to him. So they had enough of Joseph. So they see him coming to afar, and they take that jacket, that multicolored jacket, tearing his shreds. They throw him in a pit to die. One of his brothers has compassion on him, pulls him out. Reuben pulls him out, and then Reuben, while he's gone, the other brothers sell him to some traders that are coming along. The traders buy him, and then the traders run into Potiphar and his entourage, and they sell Joseph to Potiphar of Egypt, and that's how Joseph gets into Egypt. Joseph serves Potiphar well. He rises up, has a lot of authority. He's worthy, trustworthy. He makes good decisions. He does everything right. The problem is Potiphar's wife likes Joseph. Joseph keeps refusing her. Then finally one day she cries out rape, says he assaulted her, says that he tried to lay with her. Joseph flees the scene, but the Potiphar takes the word of his wife, probably knowing that she's not telling the truth. Instead of killing him, graciously by God's sovereignty, Joseph is thrown into jail. Into jail, he meets a baker and a cupbearer. They have dreams that they cannot interpret. He interprets the dream for the baker. He's going to get hung. For the cupbearer, he's going to be restored to Pharaoh's court. Everything comes to pass just like Joseph said. But the problem is that the cupbearer was supposed to mention to the Pharaoh, I'll put a good word to the Pharaoh about him, but the cupbearer gets caught up back in his position, forgets about this Hebrew prisoner, doesn't mention it, and it goes on for 2 years. So when we come to chapter 41, Joseph has been in prison for 2 years. 2 years. And you may ask yourself, that's not Joseph's life. It's been terrible. None of this that has happened to him has been his fault, and it has not been his fault. He received preferential treatment. He didn't ask for it. He was a receiver of it. The only thing he could be guilty of was telling the dreams to his brothers and ultimately to his brothers and father. That's the only thing he's guilty of. So he's been sold into slavery. Then he's sold into slavery again. Then he goes into Potiphar's house, does a great job to no fault of his own. He's thrown into prison, and now he's been there 2 years. 2 years. And you may ask yourself, what is God doing in his life? What is God trying to teach Joseph? Well, I think that what God does is that he allows us to have unfortunate things happen to us. In fact, terrible things happen to us, or for us to have adversity in our lives, simply to be more dependent upon him. You may say, well, he should have been. He was in slavery, but sometimes God wants us to be even more dependent on him because he has even greater things for us in the future. And this is the case with Joseph. And so I believe that during these 2 years, it was difficult years for Joseph, but he never lost faith, never gave up hope, never stopped relying on God for his strength. And so after these 2 years of adversity, being in prison, excelling there, because everywhere he went, the hand of God was on him. He excelled. He excelled in prison. But I guarantee you that during those 2 years, he knew more about God than he had ever learned about him. And that's a lesson to us. When we go through adversity, a loss of a job, a broken relationship, death in the family, illness, whatever it may be, God is speaking to us and he's saying, lean on me, spend time with me, get to know me. I look back at my times of adversity, and I've had times of adversity. I didn't like the adversity. I didn't want the adversity, but when I look back and I've come through that adversity, depending upon God, guess what? It's the best thing for me. I'm a better person. I know God better. I can trust him even more on other adverse situations. And God has taken me through a difficult situation and refined me, and he has grown me as a Christian. And this is what happened here. These 2 years, this whole experience has grown Joseph. If you remember in the beginning at 17, he was a little naive, innocent, kind of bragged a little bit, kind of boastful a little bit, had a little pride. He wasn't that humble. But when he comes out of these 2 years, you're going to see a different Joseph, one that has humility, one that is mature, one that is very humble, one that knows how to keep his mouth shut, one that knows how to keep his dreams to himself. He's a totally different person. He is mature and he's been perfected, and God is ready to use him. So if you're going through something, count it as a test. God is trying to develop you and trying to grow you. Lean on him. Listen to what he has to say. Figure out what he's doing in your life, and most of all, trust him. So here in verse 41, I know we're coming to 42, but we got to get to 25, and I'll just kind of go through it really quick. Chapter 41 tells us that after 2 whole years, Pharaoh, the person over all of Egypt, had a dream that he could not interpret, had a dream that disturbed him, had a dream that troubled him, that bothered him, and he needed an answer. And so he dreamed that he was standing by the Nile River. And behold, came out of the Nile River were 7 cows. These cows were attractive. They were plump. They were healthy. They were well fed. And they fed on the grass. Now the key is they came out of the Nile. The Nile River was a life-sustaining river for all of Egypt. It was the centrality of their life. They needed that river to exist. So they came out of the Nile River, these 7 cows, out of something that was important to Egypt, life-sustaining. These 7 cows. Why cows? Cows were in Israel, the figure is sheep and goats. In Egypt, what they look upon or what they like a lot are cows. So they reference cows or have an affinity for cows, whereas Jewish people have an affinity for sheep and goats. If you remember, in Egypt, they looked down upon shepherds because they dealt with sheep and goats, but they loved cows. They had an affinity for cows. They had a liking for cows. So now they have, everything is good. Cows is something they like. The Nile River is a life-giving force. According to this dream, they have produced nice, attractive, and plump cows that fed on reed grass. They were eating. Things were healthy. Life-sustaining. Things were going well. And it says here, and behold, 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up out of the Nile. Now, you got this Nile River, life-sustaining, but 7 ugly cows, thin and ugly, came out of there. Okay? So it's a contradiction. Came out of the bank of the Nile. And then it says here, and then the ugly, thin cows, the ones that were thin and shriveled up, malnourished, not eating off the grass, starving to death, these 7 cows ate up the plump cows. That bothered Pharaoh. Then the Bible says here, it bothered him so much that he awoke. Then he went back to sleep. Then he had another dream. Now we have Pharaoh having a second dream. And his second dream says this, according to chapter 41. And he fell asleep and dreamed a second time. So the first dream woke him up, didn't bother him too much, so he went back to sleep. But then he had another dream. And behold, 7 ears of grain, plump and good, were growing on one stalk. Look at this. 7 ears. Usually it's 1 ear per stalk. But this time, this dream says, this was 7 ears of grain, plump and good, were growing from one stalk. So he's talking about abundance, being fruitful, having wealth, things are going well, more food than you need. It says here, and behold, after them sprouted 7 ears thin. There were scrawny ears of corn, blighted by the east wind, scorched, beat up by the east wind, the desert wind. And the thin ears swallow up the 7 plump, full ears. So here you're having, in these 2 dreams, an abundance, or you having something that's plump, rich, and healthy, followed by something that's thin, just the opposite, and scrawny and starving. And the starving cow or the starving ears of corn, eat up the plump ones. And it says right here, and the Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. This time he wakes again. So in the morning, his spirit was troubled. He had these two dreams back to back. It troubled him. And he sent and called for the magicians of Egypt and all the wise men. These magicians of Egypt, they were intellectuals. They were educated. They were reputable people of that day in Egypt. He called the best of the magicians of Egypt and all his wise men. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but none of them could interpret them to Pharaoh. In other words, God blinded them from interpreting the dream, blinded Pharaoh from understanding it. And God is doing this on purpose because he's going to bring Joseph back into the picture. You see, the issue is that adversity, what we have to understand, when we go through adversity, God is working behind the scenes. God is doing things that we know nothing about. God is setting the stage for our revival, for our redemption, to make us whole again. God is working behind the scenes. And so that's what he's doing here. Okay? And then all of a sudden the chief cupbearer, I'm going to kind of go a little bit fast. He says to Pharaoh, I remember when I was in prison, there was a young Hebrew boy who interpreted my dreams. Not only my dream, but the dream of the baker. And the way he interpreted the dream, he said that I would live and be restored, and the baker would die and be hung and be killed. And the cupbearer tells Pharaoh, and it happened just like he said it would happen. He interprets it. I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged. And the Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they quickly got him out of the pit. He was in prison. Not a nice prison, a terrible prison, an adverse situation. And see, another thing we also got to learn also is that when we're going through adversity, we got to keep our faith, keep our trust, because when God calls us out of that pit, out of that situation, we have got to be ready. Our minds have to be in tune on God. We have to be ready for what God's going to do in our life. If we're wallowing, or we're bitter, or we're angry, mad at the world, say, why is God angry at God? Why has God done this to me? Why did he let this happen to me? Then we're not going to be ready for the time when God uses us. But here, Joseph, if you go through this story of all the things that happened to him, you never hear him lashing out at God. You don't ever hear him being bitter or angry. I know he is discouraged at sometimes, but you don't see that being a way of life in him. He doesn't let that indwell or possess him. So here we have the Pharaoh is sent and called Joseph. They bring him out of the pit. They shave himself, shave his head, take every hair off his body. If you remember, if you know about anything about the pharaohs in Egypt at that day, hair was a sign of uncleanliness. Hair was a sign of ungodliness. So when you see pharaohs with a slick head and no facial hair, no beard, no mustache, nothing that effect, that they felt they were clean before the gods. They felt that was being godlike. Whereas in the Hebrew culture, the beard and long hair was something that made them feel closer to God or godly. So here they bathe them up, they put them on fine clothes, they do all that stuff, make them presentable before the Pharaoh, and then the Pharaoh goes on to tell him what his dream was. Goes on to tell him, and it troubles him, and he's desperately needing somebody to interpret it. He says, then he tells them, it was told to the musicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. This is what I like what Joseph said. This verse 25. This tells you his maturity. This tells you that he learned from his mistakes. This tells you where he is at in his faith walk with God. He said, then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. I mean, they're one dream. They're not two separate dreams. They ought to be looked upon as one. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he's about to do. 17, he would have said, oh, I know what it means. He would have said, But a couple of years later, maybe 3 years later, 4 years later, it says here, the God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. It is all about God. It's all about what God is about to do. So it's not about me interpreting dreams. It's God interpreting the dreams. He says here, the 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one. So here we have 7 good years lined up. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years. The 7 empty ears, blighted by the east wind, are also 7 years of famine. So in other words, there are going to be 7 good years of abundance, plenty of food, more than they would ever need, and it will be followed by 7 years of a dire famine where people, if they did not have food or anything saved up, they would literally starve to death. Not only would it be people, but it would be animals, any kind of livestock, any kind of thing. They would not be able to sustain themselves or feed themselves because it would be nothing there. So he goes right here. It is as I told Pharaoh. God, he says God again. Look what he does. Out of adversity, he has learned to depend on God. Out of adversity, he knows that any good thing that happens to him is because of God, and it is shown in how he's talking to Pharaoh. Pharaoh may not really understand what's happening, but Joseph is giving a testimony. He says, God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do. He says it again. There will come 7 years of great plenty throughout the land of Egypt, but after them, there'll arise 7 years of famine, and all the plenty will be forgot in the land of Egypt. What that means is that this famine that comes after this land of plenty will be so severe, they will forget about the good times and the abundant times, the time they had plenty of food, where everybody had everything in the times of Egypt. So just as much, or even more so, as it was good in Egypt the first 7 years, it will be that worse or more in the time of the famine. That's what he says. Look what he says about the famine. The famine will consume the land. It will be everywhere. And plenty will be unknown in the land by the reason of the famine that will follow. It will not be any food there. People will starve, for it will be very severe. He says, look what he says also. And the doubling of Pharaoh's dream means that the thing is fixed by God, meaning that it's going to happen for sure. There's no way about it. It is happening for sure. And God will shortly bring it about, meaning that it's about to happen. So that double dream, those 2 dreams, emphasizes the intensity, emphasizes that will happen for sure, emphasizes that it is about to happen now. So life is about to change for the good, but then it's going to quickly change for the worse. It says, now therefore, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man. Look how wise Joseph is. Look how well he talks. I just love him. He is grown up. He's mature. He could be bitter. He could be angry. When they came up for him to interpret that dream, he could say, no, I'm not going to interpret this dream because you guys did me wrong. You put me in jail. I was in jail and you done me wrong. He could have done that. No. His obedience is to God first. He has no resentment, has no bitterness. He is a servant of God. He has learned to lean on God, and by leaning on God, trusting God, he has joy and peace and has resentment to no one. He has grown. He has matured. That's what adversity and testing would do. It will change you. It will refine you. It will make you into the image of Christ. So he says right here, he says, now therefore let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. He's giving him good counsel. Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers over the land and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years, and let them gather all the food for these good years that are coming, and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it. In other words, take 1/5 of all what you grow in these first 7 years, save it for the famine, have people over it and manage it, so when people experience that famine and the severity of it, they will have food to eat, so this land will not perish. Let's look at verse 37. Verse 37, Joseph's life is about to change. He's about to rise to power. And so, Bible says that the proposal pleased Pharaoh and all his servants. They saw the wisdom of God in Joseph. They saw that it made sense, that it was logical, that it was a good thing to do. They were pleased with the interpretation of the dream. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find a man like this? Can we find a man like this in whom is the Spirit of God? Even though he was not a believer, he recognized what he said. He recognized when he saw Joseph that he was Spirit-filled. He was a man of God. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has shown you all of this, there is none so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards to the throne will I be greater than you. Look what happened here. What I love about this. Adversity. If Joseph would have had any different attitude, if he would have been mad at God, hated God, he wouldn't have been ready for this opportunity. God wouldn't have given this opportunity. He wouldn't have spoken with wisdom. He probably wouldn't have been able to interpret this dream. But because God he was obedient, and God had molded and shaped him and made him into what he wants to be, and ordered his steps, he was ready for this, and God elevated him. See, adversity is a way of elevation. We got to remember, Elizabeth tells us here, even though there's adversity, when you come out of your adversity, there's blessings around the corner. Adversity is a preparation for God's blessings in your life. There's a story in Africa, and it talks about locusts. Locusts can come, and they can destroy all kind of property, and they come in waves, and they blacken the sky. And so one time, when they do come, this is how the people handle it. They come in, they eat up everything. And the thing about it, that winter, they don't have enough food to eat. But those dead locusts that have died, they fertilize the ground, and then when the next harvest comes, the harvest is bountiful, it's beautiful. And what that means is that when you go through hard times and you lean on God, there's a blessing around the corner. Your adversity is a down payment for your blessing if you trust God. And that's what happened here. Joseph's obedience was a down payment for his blessing. Joseph's obedience proved that God could trust him with more. And so whatever you're going through, whatever I'm going through, we have got to trust God. And if we trust God, no matter what happens, we're going to handle that situation like Joseph did, or God has a blessing just sitting there waiting for us, like he did for Joseph. So here, he puts him over the land. He gives him a signet ring. He gives him all the fancy garb to wear, a gold chain around his neck, gives him a second chariot, calls him out before everybody, bows his knee, anoints him in front of everybody, changes his name, gives him his daughter in marriage, who makes him assimilate into the royal court, into the Egyptian culture, permanent and complete. He does that, and then he sends Joseph out to rule the land. Wow. Going from the bottom to the top. You never know what God has in plan for you, in store for you. You never know. It's not going to always be the way it is. Trust God. Watch and see what God will do. He can take you from the bottom, take you to the top. You can be sick one day, you can be well the next. You can be struggling financially one day, and you can be financially healthy the next day. You can be mourning over the loss of death, and you can be celebrating life the next day. You can be down one moment, and next minute you're up, not even thinking about what your past was like. That's what God can do. That's what he done in his life. So here, right here, it says in 46, it's a key verse. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. So from the time he was taken by his brothers to now, 13 years have gone by. 13 years have gone by. 13 years. And so in 13 years, God had raised up Joseph. And so we learn here that things happen according to the way Joseph interpreted the dream. Joseph stirred up food and all that kind of stuff. And everything was in abundance, so much so like the sand in the sea, until it ceased to measure it, for it could not be measured. Now this right here, 50 to 52. Before the year of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph. God blesses him with children. God blesses him with children. Look what Joseph does. This is key. Don't miss it. The daughter, he had 2 children by the daughter of the Pharaoh. Okay? And then he says, Joseph called the name of the first one Manasseh. That's a Hebrew name. That means forgotten. God has made me forget all my hardship. In the midst of being in an Egyptian culture, in the midst of being separated from his family, his homeland, Joseph never forgot where he came from. He never lost his faith. And we know that because he gave his firstborn a Hebrew name. Not only did he give his firstborn a Hebrew name, the Bible tells us that he gave his second son a Hebrew name, Ephraim. God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. God, he hung on to God. What got him through his adversity was his relationship with God. What kept him strong was his relationship with God. What kept him hopeful and faithful, it was his relationship with God. He's seen God work in his life. He knew if he just held on to God, God somehow would make a way, and God made a way. And then the Bible tells us here that the famine did come, and the people were ready for the food. When the Bible says, when the people cried to Pharaoh for bread, Pharaoh said, go to Joseph and do what he says to do. The famine was so bad. It says here, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. Moreover, look what it says here. All the earth came to Egypt to Joseph to buy grain, because the famine was severe over all the earth. God used Joseph to save Egypt, to save people in other countries, other nations, and eventually he's going to use Joseph to save even his own family. What a powerful lesson. I love Joseph. I love his attitude. I love how he can remain faithful in difficult situations. Whoa, I pray God uses extreme examples like this to give us an example how to live by. Very few people, if any, can have it worse than Joseph. Being mistreated by his brothers, being thrown in a pit, being sold into slavery, then sold into slavery again, suffering an injustice, ending up in jail. Someone promising to tell the Pharaoh about him, that promise broken, having to serve at least 2 years in prison for something that he did not do. Not too many people at that young of age can handle what he did, but he gives an example. If we can hold on to God, we can make it. I made some little notes on what I got from this lesson. I just want to share a couple things with you. One thing that I learned from here is that Joseph had hope. He had hope. Never lost his hope. Never lost his faith. Never stopped believing. What a testimony for us. No bitterness, no anger in his heart. One thing I learned about Joseph was no matter what situation he was in, whether he was in Potiphar's house as a slave, whether he was in prison, he did his best for the glory of God. One thing I like about Joseph, when he got out of his situation, he gave glory to God. He didn't say, I did it. He didn't say, I did this. And you never heard the word I from Joseph. You heard the word God. And that's critical. That's a lesson for us. And that's a lesson for us. And one thing I also learned about this is that maybe God allowed this terrible thing to happen to Joseph so that one day, and I know it's true, that he would save his family. And not only save his family, but save other people. You don't know why God is allowing you to go through what you're going through. You don't know. But one thing I do know is that he's allowing you to go through it so that you can be a blessing to someone else. So you can help someone else that is in need. Someone else that may need wise counsel. Someone else that's going through what you're going through. God is preparing you to be a blessing for his glory. One thing I like about this is the humility of Joseph, the maturity that he displays. One thing I like about him is how well he served unbelieving people. Potiphar was an unbeliever, but yet he served him well. The person in prison, the cupbearer, interpreted his dream, served him. He served him well. Pharaoh, he served him well. God puts us in positions sometimes of being with unbelievers, not to be an antagonistic, not to talk about them, but serve them so well that they see Christ in you, that they can't help but recognize that the Lord is dwelling inside of you and that you are a child of God. Powerful lesson. Powerful lesson. No bitterness, no anger. If Joseph can go through this and endure, and guess what? When we go through what we have to go through, we can have the right attitude there. What God did for him, he can do for you. He can do for you. And he will reward you. It will not be in vain. I hope this lesson on obedient love has been beneficial to you. Obedient love that we learn here does not depend on your circumstances. You're not just obedient when things are going well, but you are obedient. The test is when things are not going so well. That's the test. That's the test. And that's the challenge of every believer. You and I are going to have difficult times. God wants our obedience. He wants our faithfulness. He wants us to pass the test. God bless you. I love you much. I want you to have a great Sunday. Have a great Sunday school. And guess what? I'll see you next week. Love you. Love you much. Have a wonderful day.